with that, I really appreciate all that you do to support our communities, our broader nation, and individuals in need. So remember that you're doing important work, and there's lots of us out there that really appreciate all that you're doing. I'm going to stop sharing my video. I want to put it up enough to say hi. I'm Emily Jonesberg. I don't want it to mess with my audio too much, so I'm going to take myself off of the camera for the time being, but I'll keep the slides up. And before we jump into any of the content, I wanted to take a moment and just kind of ground you on Rogers Behavioral Health and the agency that I'm coming from, in case folks aren't familiar with it. So as Erin mentioned, I'm the training lead for Rogers InHealth, and that is a department within Rogers Behavioral Health. And Rogers Behavioral Health's mission is to provide highly effective mental health and addiction treatment that helps people reach their full potential for health and well-being. We're actually spread across the United States, originally started in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin, roughly over 100 years ago. And now, as you can see from the map, we've got 20 different locations across the United States. We have a chunk of them in Wisconsin. I just wanted to highlight for those of you who are on the call from the Wisconsin area. We have 6 open locations, and we're opening a 7th that should be open in early 2021 in Sheboygan, all offering a variety of services from residential, inpatient, and outpatient care when it comes to mental and behavioral health services. So if you don't know much about us or would like to learn more, I'd encourage you to check out our website where you can find out more about what Rogers has to offer. And then, as Erin mentioned, our InHealth department does the advocacy and education outreach into the community. One of the goals of Rogers is to work against the stigma associated with mental health challenges out in our community, and that's a big part of what the InHealth department works to do through a variety of our programs. And we do that in partnership with WISE, which is Wisconsin Initiative for Stigma Elimination. And this is a coalition of organizations and individuals that are working together to really promote inclusion and support for all those affected by mental health challenges. We do this by advancing evidence-based practices for stigma reduction. We have a number of programs on the WISE website to check out. If you haven't seen them already, there's a lot on there all of it is free, but there's even full content laid out in all of these programs that you can poke around and see how you want to use or alter for your agencies. So if you haven't seen the wisewisconsin.org page, I recommend you check it out at some point. So again, these are 2 entities that I'm with, and I'm excited and proud to be able to represent. And I wanted to make sure I shared that resource with you before we got started. Today, we're going to be focusing on our compassion resilience content, and we have a whole curriculum and website around that I'll just highlight briefly in a moment, but all of what I'm going to be pulling from is from compassion resilience for adults, primarily those in a helping profession. And we're going to focus on individual practices associated with compassion resilience, even though there are tons of team and organization-related pieces associated with compassion resilience too, and I'll do my best to highlight those throughout our time. Just touch on them briefly so that you can see that there's some additional resources out there. One of the resources that we find is beneficial for some in building their compassion resilience is being able to practice a sense of being mindful and in the moment. So in an effort for us to practice that and to start our time together, I'm sure many of you, just like me, are coming from a morning full of activities, both probably personally and professionally, have a lot of stuff going on, as we do nowadays. And so I just want to take a moment for us to pause here and practice a moment of mindfulness, mindful practice. So if you wouldn't mind, help me out with this. If you get comfortable, whatever that means for you, oftentimes for folks, that's if they're seated, having both feet on the floor or standing up straight, and just letting your body relax into a comfortable position. And if you're comfortable closing your eyes, great. If not, make sure you take them away at least from the screen in front of you. And I want you to just take a moment to take 3 slow breaths. And as you take that 3rd one, I want you to bring into mind, what is your reason for being here today? Why are you joining our time to talk about compassion resilience? What are you hoping to get out of this? And bring that to the forefront of your mind as you take another slow breath. And if there's anything that's getting in your way of staying focused on that, a distraction from earlier or something in the future that's causing some level of stress, just do your best to put that aside. Or even if you're like me, if you're close to windows, you're sitting next to a window, even visualize yourself putting that stressor outside the window and leaving it there to the best of your capability. Again, bring that intention for being here today back to your mind. And now I invite you to bring your attention back to the screen. Again, just a quick mindfulness practice that you can do at any time of the day to ground yourself back into your intention, into your purpose, to help recenter yourself. There's lots of different opportunities for mindfulness practices out there. And if you just do a quick Google search, there's some. And then, of course, there's some on this Compassion Resilience website that I'll share in a moment. But I find it helpful anytime I'm engaging in a new task for the day, just to take a moment to pause. It helps take care of my well-being, which is what we're here to talk about today. So we're going to be exploring those individual practices around compassion resilience, like I mentioned, and then I'm hoping that it continues your curiosity around these really important conversations that have to do with staff culture and wellness, compassion fatigue, and the broader conversation of compassion resilience. I've mentioned this toolkit several times already. It's our Compassion Resilience Toolkit. You'll see a link for it at the bottom of your page. This is meant to be a system level approach. So it's looking at how, as a team, as a culture, as an organization, can we really infuse compassion into our everyday interactions? It's one thing for organizations to say to staff, yeah, go take care of yourself, but then at the same time, I'm going to have this unwieldy expectation when it comes to caseloads or needs you need to meet of customers, hours you need to put in, documentation you need to complete, extra duties you have to do. It just doesn't feel quite right to say, yeah, go take care of yourself, but then at the same time have these unrealistic things that are paired with it. So a lot of the resources in that toolkit will look at a bigger picture. But as I mentioned, I'm going to zone in on some of those more individual practices that we can use to help take care of ourselves, even if we're not in a place organizationally with our places of work where they're ready to quite embrace us in the way that maybe we would like. All things on that website are free, easy to access. After you click on something for the third time, you will be asked to log in or create an account. It's just your email and name. I think there's also a place for your physical location, just so that we get a sense of where people are using the toolkit. And if we make any changes to it, we can send out a mass email that says, hey, we changed this resource on there. So I've already mentioned compassion resilience several times, and I want to take a moment to just ground us on what the definition is of compassion resilience. It's this place of empathy, strength, and hope, which I truly believe is our baseline as humans. This is where, at our core, I think we are at. We have a place of empathy, strength, and hope. And yet, after we witness all of the junk out there in the world that is unfortunately there, and after we experience it perhaps ourselves, or we see those that we work with in the community experience it, it can pull us away from that baseline of empathy, strength, and hope. So our ability to build on our compassion resilience strategies and tools, it's all about bringing us back to that baseline and helping us remain optimistic in this oh so often imperfect world. So this is kind of our baseline of where we're trying to get, and all the things we'll talk about moving forward here contribute to our compassion resilience or may pull us away, and I'll bring it up enough just so that you can have some awareness around it, can be aware of how it impacts you so that you can be mindful of how you could maybe step away from it or infuse a different practice to help you feel a little bit more balanced. One thing that I think is so core to us being able to build our compassion resilience and support others is just even knowing what compassion looks like in action. And there's lots of different ideas out there on what compassion looks like when it's actually in action. And we have 6 steps through our InHealth department that I found particularly helpful, and I wanted to take a moment to share, because I think having this as a place to work from when I'm interacting with people in need, it helps me feel more genuine, helps me feel like I'm fulfilling this desire to be compassionate. And perhaps even I'm going to talk about how I can set some boundaries up along the way too to help take care of myself in this process. So that first step in Steps to Compassionate Action is all about how do we notice someone else's pain. So we're going to utilize these steps when someone in our life, professionally or personally, comes to us in some level of distress or is experiencing some sort of challenge. And our first step is all about how are we just present enough to be there with them as they're sharing with us. And this is actually the first spot where you may set some boundaries, because no human is allowed or able to be present 100% of the time. It's just not physically possible. So there's going to be times of your day, of your week, of your year, where you're not going to be able to be your best self and your most present, compassionate self. And so actually, us setting up a boundary with someone, if they indeed come to us in pain and are looking for support and we're not in our best place, then how are we able to say to that person, I care so much about you and supporting you, and therefore I need to take a step back and connect at a later time because I'm not able to be my best self with you right now. Can we touch base in 30 minutes, in an hour, tomorrow, or even could you connect with this other individual that we have in common that I know is so helpful and is available at this time? So being able to set a boundary there is actually the most compassionate thing to do, instead of what so many of us do is just kind of push through. Okay, fine, I'll find the energy to be the support I want to be. In reality, we could set a boundary there and come back at a later time when we feel more ready to engage. But let's say indeed we're there, we're noticing the pain, we're ready to be supportive to that individual. Our next step is going to be, how do we check some of the things that come up in our head as the person is sharing that pain and that story? We, again, are all human. So we are all going to have things that pop up as somebody is sharing with us. It could be biases that we have. It could be our own story, our own experiences, feelings we've had associated with similar experiences. It could even be thoughts of wisdom and advice that starts to come into our head as someone is sharing. All of these things will start to distract us from being able to be fully present for that person as we get ready to move into our third step. So we want to do our best to set those things aside so we can be there to do number 3, which is to seek to understand. And this is where I'm really listening with a lot of curiosity, and I'm trying to pull out the feelings and the strengths that someone is experiencing or sharing with me in their story. I don't have to worry about the he said, she said, they went here at this time kind of stuff. I need to worry more about what kind of feelings that person's conveying and where are they really excelling, what kind of strengths do they have, so that I can reflect it back as I move through the rest of these steps of compassionate action. Our next one is that empathy. How am I going to cultivate empathy? So I'm going to pull those feelings that I got out of the seek to understand step, and I am going to connect to them in my own personal experience. I could never say, no one can ever say they truly understand what someone else is experiencing. We all experience things differently, but we probably all can say, you know what, I have felt a time of sadness, withdrawn, a time when I felt disrespected or left out or lonely. We can all probably connect to these kinds of feelings and our own experience. And I'm going to pull that up for me in this cultivating empathy step enough so that I continue to be motivated to stick with this person as we work through the next 2 steps. And so I can truly feel like I am sitting down in some ways next to this person and supporting them as they're going to move forward to make an action plan. You don't want to take empathy so far that you get consumed with your own stuff, which can be easy to do, especially if it's strong feelings and you've had strong experiences around them. You could get lost in that. So you want to kind of create a barrier there where you're only doing it enough to motivate yourself to stay involved and feel connected to that person. And then you move on to step 5, which is this discerning best action. This is about how do I support this person I'm with in them coming up with their own solution. I would say probably 85% of the time when somebody is struggling with something, They have the answer somewhere inside them. They have that wisdom, regardless of really age. I'm somebody who's worked a lot with young people, primarily middle, high school age folks, have a lot of wisdom. We don't always give them as much credit as we should. How can I listen somebody into that wisdom, ask them those open-ended questions so they're able to pull that out of themselves and make a plan that works best for them? If you all are anything like me, you probably are much more likely to follow a plan that you create than somebody else has created for you. Now, of course, there's going to be about the 15% time where somebody doesn't have the answers inside them and they need some advice. And this is an opportunity for you to ask before you give those suggestions. So saying, it seems you're really stuck. Would you like some thoughts on what I would do next? Or, you know, I have experienced something similar and it sounds like maybe you'd like some new ideas. Would you like to hear what I've done in the past? Or what clients that I've worked with have done in the past? Or I've seen friends do in the past? You're still giving people the chance to say yes or no, which really empowers them to be involved in this process of making a plan moving forward. And after they've made this plan, number 6 is all about how do I make sure there's action afterwards? So if hopefully one of your questions during number 5 is how can I best support you? And if someone says, for example, you know, could you check in with me tomorrow about this and just see how I'm doing? And then tomorrow comes and I forget to do it, I am kind of wiping away all the work I did 1 through 5. And I got to make sure if I make a commitment that I indeed stick with it. This again is another chance for setting a boundary. So if you get to section 5 or step 5 and somebody says, you know, you could really support me by doing this, and I truly don't feel like I could do that, I don't have the time, the capacity, the skill, I have the opportunity to say that then, you know, I'm not able to provide that kind of support, but I could provide this, or I could connect you to this individual who could provide that kind of support. No need for us to say yes to something that indeed we're not going to be able to follow through with. Will cause in some ways more harm than good in lots of ways. So another chance to set a compassionate boundary in there. These are our 6 steps for showing compassion and having compassion in action. Would not be surprised if everybody on this call has done these steps or does these steps on a regular basis. And yet, even as someone also on the call who works my best to do these 6 steps on a regular basis, having a reminder can really help because these are hard. It seems so straightforward, but yet once you get in it, it's hard to do all of these sometimes, and particularly to avoid jumping into that advice giving mode. So that's why I like to just start this off, because A, it gives me a chance to talk about what compassion looks like in action, and just a reminder of where we want to be as our individuals in our workplace and in our personal life. I'm just going to be one of my pauses to see if there's any questions or comments about that section 1, compassionate action steps. I'm not hearing anything, Erin, so I think I'm going to continue.
There are no questions yet.
Okay, great. And I also just want to say, I forgot to mention, you'll see I have section 1 next to this. You'll see some section, 4 or 5, whatever, throughout this PowerPoint. I kept them on there because in case you're like, I'd like this visual or I'd like more information on it. Again, if you go to that compassionresiliencetoolkit.org website and you go into that health and human services bubble, and then you go into the get started bubble, you'll see all sections 1 through 12 in there. And you could go to section 1 and you'll see compassion action steps, additional resources all are in there. So as you see a section, if you happen to like the content in that one, that's where you can go on the website to find out more. One other practice that we have at InHealth I really like to use is this one to help build some compassion. So I would say we probably all have people in our life where it can be challenging to connect and challenging to have compassion for that person sometimes. It could be just because of a personality difference or a history with that person. Whatever the case may be, we probably all have those folks. And so this strategy here is about how do we tap into that compassion when it can be hard to do so. And the idea behind this break for the heart practice is that you bring that person to mind, you truly visualize them as you walk through these 5 steps. So if you can think of somebody in your life right now that maybe you're struggling a little bit with to have compassion for, bring them to mind. I'm going to read through these 5. Just like me, this person is seeking happiness in their life. Just like me, this person is trying to avoid suffering in their life. Just like me, this person has known sadness, loneliness, and despair. Just like me, this person is seeking to fill their needs. And just like me, this person is learning about life. They're seeking happiness, trying to avoid suffering. They've known sadness, loneliness, and despair. They're seeking to fill their needs, and they're learning about life. Another great strategy for building up our ability to have compassion for others and a strategy for our own compassion resilience. Also, just some great reminders for ourselves as we struggle through some of these oh so challenging times, like they were not challenging enough. Now we've got some extra things on our plate. So again, a reminder of our own common humanity and our ability to, these are some of the things that we're seeking in some of our truths, which is a segue into another really important part when it comes to compassion resilience, and that's of self-compassion. We are not going to be able to take care of ourselves, care for ourselves, or show compassion to others if we're not able to practice some self-compassion. We pull from the work of Dr. Kristen Neff for this, and there's a link there for a self-compassion assessment. If you'd like to take an assessment to see, as of this moment, on this day, how are you doing in regards to treating yourself? Are you being compassionate and warm? And are you following these three components when it comes to self-compassion? And those three components, the first one is, let's say you have something negative that's come up in your life. You've reached a challenge, you've made a mistake, something that you're being hard on yourself about. Do you go to a place of kindness first, telling yourself, you know, everybody makes mistakes, it's okay, I'll try again? Or do you go to a place where you become very self-critical? I can't believe you did that. You're always making mistakes. You're such an idiot. Those kinds of very negative self-talk. The second component is, do you go to a place of common humanity? So just like I mentioned on that previous practice, do you recognize that you're human and that all humans make mistakes and all humans have challenges? That is part of the human race, good or bad, that's something about us. And so, of course, you're going to make a mistake. So do you go to that as a reminder when you make one? Or do you go to this place of, I'm the only one that would make this kind of mistake. I'm the only one that messes up this frequently, this often. And then the third component is this mindfulness piece. So as this negative self-talk may start to pop into your head, are you aware of it? Do you see it? You say, hi, not so great talk, and let it pass? Or do you cling to it? Do you over-identify with it? Does it become part of who you are? And the more that you're able, when you make a mistake or you fall short of something, the more you're able to practice that self-kindness, see yourself as just another human, and be mindful of those negative emotions and let them pass, the more you're going to be able to practice this self-compassion. And my goodness, it makes such an impact. The way we talk to ourselves has a huge impact on our well-being and our ability to be compassionate to other people. If you think about it in your workspace, for example, when you make a mistake, if you go to a place where you're beating yourself up, most likely, for anything like me, that means you're not 100% present for the people that you're serving. It means you're giving off kind of a not so fun vibe. It means that you may make additional mistakes moving forward because you're so distracted with the one you made prior, and ultimately you're just not being your best self. So how, if you could instead take this self-compassion approach, you'll be able to approach things in a much more healthy, holistic way. I want to transition now into this topic around compassion fatigue, because I think this is really important when we look at compassion resilience. And this is things that pull us away from compassion resilience. So those first two pieces, those are foundational for us talking about compassion in general and how we approach others with compassion. And now I just want to get real that there's lots of things out there that cause us to feel drained and fatigue over time. And I'm using compassion fatigue very much as an umbrella term. It includes things like secondary trauma, which is we're working with somebody who's experienced a lot of trauma, and after hearing about it, I, as a result, start to experience some of that trauma. Burnout, which is essentially I have too much on my plate consistently. I never really get to take that break, so I fizzle out. And compassion satisfaction. So am I really being able to prioritize compassion and feel like I'm getting that from others? So when we experience compassion fatigue, we're much more likely to have a lessening amount of compassion over time. We usually avoid trying to understand what other people are faced because we're just kind of, like I mentioned, burnt out, worn out. We usually become less effective in our roles, and our life satisfaction and joy in work decreases. So some really crummy stuff associated with compassion fatigue. And yet, it's something that all of us experience, I would say, in life in general, but certainly in a helping profession. You all, myself included, experience probably more than we'd like to admit. So this part is just about how do we get to know what this looks like in practice so that we can be aware of it and pull ourselves away from it when we do start to see it happening. We took the work of Dr. Eric Gentry and put some cats to it just to liven up the cycle a little bit. So this first phase is the zealot phase. This is when we've perhaps gotten a new role. I'll use professional examples here, though you could easily use this in a parenting role or lots of other personal relationships. Let's say you're at work role and you've gotten a new position, or you're starting you've gotten a promotion, you're starting at a new agency, or even you're starting a whole new project. You're super excited, you start adding on lots of things to your plate, and your expectations aren't realistic. It's fitting that this would be the first part of the compassion fatigue cycle. You've gone above and beyond, and it's not something that you're able to sustain. So after you perhaps have done this, you may move into this next part of the cycle, and that's that grumpy cat or the irritability stage. It's when you may start to experience a lot of anger, cynicism. You're not going to be as creative. You're feeling helpless and hopeless. You're just starting to feel kind of irritable, as it implies, and you're having some negative interactions probably with those around you. So you're much more short, perhaps with your colleagues or even those that you're working with. You're seeing a lot of the imperfections in the system. Maybe you're real excited about that new role, and now you're seeing like, oh, I'm not actually getting the kind of support I need. We don't have the right funding, so on and so forth, right? So they're starting to see some of the imperfections, as we mentioned earlier, those imperfections in our world. If we're not able to get out of this cycle, then we may move into that withdrawal phase. This is when we just get so drained. We may see a lack of physical energy. We may see an increase in physical illness and mental health challenges. You may see that there's a presenteeism, so you're physically showing up to work, but you're just not mentally there, and you're having a really hard time connecting with other people and showing compassion for folks. Just a real drained feeling. This can move you into the zombie cat phase. This is very much a one step in front of the other. I'm not leaning on anybody for support. There may be an inflated sense of purpose, like I am the only one who can connect with this client. I am the only one who could complete this project. I don't see myself as a part of a broader team or organization. And I'm quite what we like to call crispy at this point. I probably have a feeling of irritability consistently. I'm very much in survival mode, so I'm not able to tap into big picture thinking or thinking out of the box. And I'm overall just not very happy at work or at home. And I would say when you are experiencing these stages in a personal or professional life, oftentimes, particularly once you get through the cycle closer to zombie, you see it start to spread into your professional life if it's personal, and your personal life if it's professional. Ideally, you're able to get out of this cycle at some point and not come to the place of leaving the profession. But we so often see this. I would say in my nonprofit work, certainly, I did a lot of work with runaway and homeless youth at a previous organization. And goodness, an opportunity just to continue to pour our hearts out there, right? And experience a lot of burnt out and fatigue. And I saw colleagues that were perfect fits for this work. They were great at what they did, and yet they weren't great at protecting themselves along the way. And they thought at the end of the day, you know what, I'm just not a good fit. I'm just not meant to do this kind of work, which is really unfortunate. We lost folks who really were talented, but just weren't able to get out of this cycle of compassion fatigue. Ideally, you are able to get to a place of compassion resilience where you're able to pull yourself away from these and fill yourself up instead of feeling so burnt out you need to change paths altogether. I want to reiterate in this path, as I mentioned in the beginning, it is a completely normal response to compassion fatigue. All of us, I would say, have experienced this, and I'd say certainly with COVID, regardless of people's role, as a community, as a society, as a world, we are probably all in certain places of compassion fatigue right now with everything going on in our society. And so completely normal that we're going to have this kind of reaction. And again, it's just good for us to be aware enough that we can say, yep, you know what? I'm in that zombie cat mode right now. I need to do something to help myself get out of it. The link at the bottom of this slide, it's called the ProQual. It's a professional quality of life scale. And this one would be something you could use if you're curious about how you're doing in regards to burnout and compassion fatigue in your professional role right now. This is never something that's meant to be shared with a supervisor. Like, for example, a supervisor says, here, supervisee, fill this out and we'll come back and we're going to talk all about this at our next supervision. This is more just for personal reflection. And it seems my slides on my side froze a bit. Hopefully they'll continue on ours. Great. Okay, so that is, again, the ProQual there is just this resource that you'd be able to use for your own reflection when it comes to compassion fatigue, so that you can think about how you can best pull yourself out of it. And maybe even fun to have with a partner, with a colleague, to say, hey, here's a common tool for us to use this cycle with cats, to say, you know what, I'm in this stage today, I need this kind of support. I want to do another chance just to do what we call break for spirit here. And this is because this is yet another one of these wellness practices that, as Erin mentioned at the beginning, goes much more beyond your stereotypical get your steps in, eat a salad kind of thing, but has been found to have a profound effect on our ability to feel well and staying in a place of compassion resilience. And that's tapping into where do we feel most alive and most excited. So I'm going to pause and I'm going to ask if you're willing in the chat, if you would put into chat, what is that time? What are you doing when you feel most alive, most like yourself? And as people get that into chat, I want you to think about, as you reflect, perhaps you're somebody who is watching the recorded version of this as well, you reflect on when is that for me? What comes to mind immediately? Is it a place where you are at work? Does it reflect a time when you were at work? Or is it a place in your personal life? And oftentimes when I ask people these questions, they say a time in their personal life. And I, to be honest, would say when I feel most alive is also in my personal life. But then what does this mean about how we are getting to know those that we're working with? And how do we work in opportunities to get to know them on this deeper level? Even if it's just asking this question, when do you feel most alive? Can you tell me about it? What are you doing? Getting to see people light up. And then another strategy around this is to think, if it's not something about work, think about what is. There's got to be something at work, I'm sure, probably multiple things, where you do feel excited and feel filled up. And reflect on what that is, and how often when you go home at night and connect with your loved ones and friends, how often are you sharing what that is, the thing that you really enjoyed about your day versus the thing that left you feeling drained and exhausted. And I think across us as a society, our default is to go to that place of, oh, all the junk that happened today. Let me tell you about it. I just kind of want to word vomit all this horrible things that happened to me or that I was frustrated with, or can you believe this person said this? And what this does, it is beneficial to have a small amount of time to vent. Certainly, there's a chance to feel affirmed in this. And yet, once we've crossed that just feeling affirmed piece, we're really reliving, our bodies truly are reliving a lot of this junk from the day. It really takes us away from a place of feeling well and whole. And so instead, if we're able to shift and at least think of 2 things throughout the day, if nothing else, that brought us joy, that we enjoyed, and we're able to share those in our reflections with our loved ones and friends, you will see, if you give this a try, if you haven't already, it really does make a marked difference in your feelings post-work. And it may even have an impact on your relationships as well. I know in my chats with my partner after work as well, it's great to hear about the things that he really enjoyed about the day, and I feel even more connected instead of the laundry list of things that he didn't find as exciting. So just another tip to consider as a kind of break here in between our compassion fatigue cycle, which is one of heavy, and one that I'm going to touch on here in a moment around locus of control. A great chance to think about things that really bring us excitement.
And thank you so much for people who responded. Some people like morning time. Some people like relaxing at home on the couch, just having no thoughts. Some people find that when they help people, they really enjoy that and being around people and being able to be a problem solver, spending time with best friends and family. When a client reaches a goal that they worked hard on and want to share their success. Spending time with family, these are definitely things that can refresh us.
That's great. Thank you, Erin, for sharing that.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing.
Yeah, everyone. Thank you for contributing to that. That just fills me up in lots of ways just to get to hear those examples. Our next piece is this around drivers of fatigue and resilience. And this is just, I want to do this because I want to give it a small chance to personalize that earlier cycle around compassion fatigue, but also transition us into thinking about some additional things that fill us up. I know folks put some of those in just a moment ago, but hopefully you've got lots more to add to a list around resilience. And then I also just want to talk about the idea around control when we look at these systems of drivers of fatigue and resilience. And this has been particularly helpful for me, the control piece, as I've gone through the pandemic, because there are just even more things that I feel I don't have control about. But first, I want you to think about what things in your day, personally or professionally, just drain you, leave you feeling exhausted, you don't enjoy. Take a moment to brainstorm some of those for yourself. If you've got a piece of paper nearby, you could jot down a few of those ideas. COVID may be on your list. It would be on my list. I would say on mine as well would be when I don't get good sleep, when I run into the imperfections in the system, things that aren't able to help people who need help, driver fatigue. Another thing that I find draining is just our examples of racism and oppression throughout our society. When I don't eat right, when I don't get exercise. And now I want you to think about that list or make a list around resilience. What kind of things leave you filled up, excited, energized? This could be, for me, for example, time with friends and family. I'd like someone to mention helping others, chocolate, tea. What kind of things leave you feeling full and joyful? And I want to try this one more time with the chat, if you wouldn't mind. If you would take one item from your fatigue list and you would pop it into chat. And then Erin, if you wouldn't mind just reading off maybe 5 of the things that come through for us.
Sure. For fatigue, people said family problems, barriers that get in the way. When a family they are working with says they want help but do not do the action steps to help themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And we've already got some things that fill you up coming through. Playing with a puppy, reading a good book, learning new things, taking time off, helping people, and when it actually goes right, that feels good. And another driver of compassion fatigue is crabby clients.
Yeah, you're here.
Oh, and yeah, listening to the news could be a driver of compassion fatigue for sure.
Definitely. I agree. Great. So there's a great started list. And I would imagine if you, after this time together, you sat down, I'm sure you could put lots more things on both sides of the list. My next part of this activity I'd have you do is for you to go through all the things you had on your list and strike out those that you feel you have no control over. Let's say in the next year, do you have any control over that piece? If you don't, scratch it off. If you think you do have some control, circle it. And then if there's some things on there that you're like, I think with some additional support, I could have some control, you could put an S next to it for support. This would be something I'm not going to spend much time now for you to go through and code, but I would encourage you to do, because then that next step is to take a step back and look at your list and see which of these things are crossed off and which are circled. And then think about, how much time do you feel you spend thinking about, dwelling over, trying to fix things that you have crossed off? And then how much time do you think it would be helpful for you to spend on the thing that is crossed off? So for example, on one of the additional drivers of my fatigue is the unpredictability with my child's daycare right now, especially with COVID. 1 minute, it could literally be a drop of a hat. I get a call that there's a potential exposure to COVID, or she has a minor symptom that could be just a common cold, but they're concerned about, rightfully so. And so she needs to return home for anywhere from 5 days to 2 weeks. And we've had this happen twice in the few months that she's been back in daycare since COVID started. It's a big driver of fatigue for me. It's hard for me to plan around work. It throws things off, right? Even though completely understandable. If I spend a lot of time stressing about this piece, at the end of the day, I don't have control over it. And so I could spend large amounts of time trying to sleep, for example, and I'm worrying about this next piece. When is this going to happen again? And it's not going to change at the end of the day. And yet I've put a lot of my energy towards it. And as a result, it's left me feeling drained, stressed out, and overall just not very good. And it hasn't had any sort of positive impact on the actual situation. So how can I instead think about taking the energy, some of the energy at least, that I'm putting towards that area that drains me, that I don't have any control over, and putting it towards something that I do feel I have some control over, time with friends and family, for example, or at least family at this point. And how can I focus on that and find some additional opportunities for us to do activities, to be together, to enjoy that time? And that is something that's going to help fill me up, that I feel I can have control over. And even though I used an example of something I don't have control over in my fatigue list and something I do have control over in my resilience list, I would say there's lots of things on probably all of our lists under the fatigue, for example, that you also feel you have some control over, that if you put some attention towards, perhaps even with some support, you could shift a little bit. And so a lot of this is about, how do we structure our energy and how do we put it towards things that are going to be helpful and or fill us up at the end of the day. Again, I feel like this is an even more important strategy right now, as there's just so many things that are out of our control and yet could easily take up the large percentage of our mental capacity and our time. So how can we look at that list a little bit differently moving forward? Another piece that's big around compassion resilience is the role of expectations. This is something that we do if there are our own personal expectations, is something we have control over. And yet a lot of times, I can tell you, when I do this work, and including my own list, my personal expectations can be a driver of fatigue, particularly when they are unrealistic. So how can I look at those and reframe them in a way where they're A, more realistic, and B, I'm able to share them with others, particularly if they're an expectation of someone else, so we can get clarity about it and work towards this kind of common goal. And it is so common to see that when people are not on the same page about expectations, how draining that can be for the relationship and keep people away from being their best selves, but also reaching that goal that they're trying to reach. So I just have a couple questions on this slide for people to consider and reflect upon. How has your unrealistic expectations impacted your well-being? What has the impact been of others' unrealistic expectations of your capacity? And how do you assess if expectations are being set at a helpful, aspirational level? And I again encourage you with these too, if you feel there's a negative impact of someone's unrealistic expectations, how could you have a conversation with them about that expectation? And then also important right now, and another big adjustment, was the shift of expectations due to COVID. So many of us had these very strict expectations when before COVID even began. We had our own set of how we're going to do at work, how things are going to go in our personal life. And then so much changed as a result of the pandemic, and yet a lot of us are holding on to those same expectations. and they're causing us to feel drained and worn out because they are, maybe they weren't realistic to begin with, but certainly now they're no longer realistic. So an opportunity for us to re-examine that and shift those expectations so they can come from a place of realistic and a place that helps keep us in feeling good and a place of wellness. Oftentimes, understanding our expectations can also lead into this conversation around compassionate boundaries. And there's this great quote from Brené Brown about compassionate boundaries and its role in resentment. I'm just going to pause to read. Compassionate people ask for what they need. They say no when they need to, and when they say yes, they mean it. They're compassionate because their boundaries keep them out of resentment. What a powerful term to think about all the times that we've been in a place of resentment, to think back, well, did I set a boundary and communicate that boundary with the person prior? Or is that why I'm in a place of resentment? There's some tips here on how to set some compassionate boundaries. The first one is the most important, in my opinion, and that's really knowing what is it we want to say yes to. So important for us to know what do we want to say yes to in order to know what we need to say no to. And we want to base that in our values and in our priorities. If I know what's most important to me, it's going to be so much easier for me to say some no to things that don't fit those things that are most important to me. And once I've established that yes, I can use that in the way in which I set boundaries. And I can follow these other tips to help me get to that place of setting compassionate boundaries. That next one is around how are we being proactive? How do we make sure we're sharing where our line is with folks ahead of time so that they know that we have a boundary around that? And sometimes even having this meeting, quote unquote, doesn't have to be a literal meeting, but a time to get together and talk about it can provide that structure where we can share and dialogue about where our boundaries at. We want to make sure that we're just saying it. We're not having people guess what our boundaries are. When there is a violation, we want to make sure we're taking an opportunity to pause and point out that that was a violation of our boundary in a very compassionate way, but just to say that no, indeed, this is important to me. And I want to send a reminder of why that is. We want to give explanations that are specific to that person and perhaps even offer an opportunity to get some shared solutions. So if, for example, at work, if I have a boundary I'm trying to set, I may even engage my supervisor to say, hey, here's a yes for me, something that's really important. I want to meet it. Can you help me think of some ways to do that in our workspace? And then, of course, the last one, always making sure you're backing your boundary up with action. If you say and communicate a boundary, but then when it's broken, you just let it be broken and give in, then people get the wrong message. And of course, they're going to continue to break that boundary moving forward. I have two examples here on this next slide about how do you use that yes when you're setting compassionate boundaries. Because I feel it's so important and it really makes a big difference when I'm setting a boundary and when I'm having someone else set a boundary with me, when they incorporate that yes. So for example, with a client, if one of your yeses is that you truly want to work with this client and your yes is also it needs to be done in a respectful way. If it's not being done in a respectful way, you could pause and say, you know, I want to work with you to figure this out. That's one of your yeses. It'll be hard if our brains are not calm enough to think, how about we take a 5-minute break? Again, a yes, I want to work with you, and a yes that I need there to be a certain tone and interaction between us in order for that to be successful for me. And a lot of times we get questions about, well, yeah, easier for me to set a boundary with a colleague, maybe even a client, but not so much at an agency level or with a supervisor. So again, I said that shared solutions on the previous tip. Here's an example of a way to do that. So although our agency goals are really important to me, again, that's one of my yeses, agency goals, I need to discuss what will come off my plate or what I can do in a different manner in order to take on anything new. I'm working on how to balance my family's needs and my workload. A yes, family's need, a yes, agency goals, a yes, I want to be a good worker. I want to get all my work done. And the no is I'm reached my capacity. I'm not able to figure out how to reach all three of those yeses given the work I already have on my plate. Can you partner with me to figure out what to do differently? a perfect role for a supervisor to be in with a supervisee. So a couple ways in which there we can use steps to compassionate actions, steps for setting compassionate boundaries to really enforce that yes throughout our time. So in our last few minutes here, I just want to point on some additional wellness practices that are more individually based, and some of them maybe some would think of as the stereotypical ones. But I want to first ground you in a resource that we have, which is a wellness practice assessment. And there's a link at the bottom of this slide that I recommend you click into. It is a very holistic look at wellness, and it comes from the Samaritan Family Foundation, Wellness Foundation, and they did a whole bunch of research before they created this assessment to look for a very holistic way. As you see from the picture on the slide, there are 4 main sections, and there's 2 subsections within each main section. This will give you a read of just how you're doing in each one of these right now. And I highly recommend if you do the assessment, you do it with the lens of looking for some new ideas, not about, oh my goodness, I scored poorly in all these things, but more, here's an idea I hadn't considered before that I think would be helpful. Or I used to do this and it was helpful and I forgot about it, or I got away from it. And I want to think about how do I incorporate it into my life again. In the sections 8 through 11 in that toolkit, if you end up visiting that site, we have each section 8, 9, 10, and 11 are dedicated to a section within that wellness compass. And there are additional activities embedded in each one of those sections that I think are amazing and would be worth a look at if you're looking for some additional compassion resilience practices beyond what we've been able to cover today in our short hour. Everything from mindfulness practices to how do you tap into your core values in your work on a regular basis, to how do you see stress in a way of seeing it as an opportunity to grow and to challenge ourselves, and less as something that's draining us and causes us to have poor health, to the emotional regulation plans, which that is what the link is at the bottom of that page, is a link to the emotional regulation plans, because that's one that I wanted to highlight and I think is so helpful in a lot of the work that we're doing. And so often people have exposure to it, but not for themselves. When I was doing youth work, it wasn't uncommon that I would talk about an emotional regulation plan with the young people I was working with. We would talk, what do you need to know about yourself in order to know when you're going to be triggered? What kind of things help you feel more centered? What kind of support can I and other adults around you provide, right? All the time we probably talk to people that we serve around those things. And yet we forget it can be so helpful for us to have our own emotional regulation plan. Where do we get triggered? What kind of supports do we need along the way? What kind of activities help us feel more like ourselves? And taking a moment to figure that out, and then finding a couple people in our life that we feel comfortable with and that are great supports for us to share it with, can be really helpful as we kind of continue to navigate the world and all that it's throwing our way. We kind of have that plan in place then for when we may get thrown off. So again, I recommend that you check out that tool and then a variety of the other ones that are available throughout the toolkit in those sections. In our last few moments here, I just want to say how appreciative again that I have had the chance to be with you all, and that I so appreciate all the work that you're doing for our communities and for our individuals and your coworkers. And that I know that a lot of us rely on the supports the Salvation Army provides, and thank you so much for being there for those in need. And I now want to just pause and see if there's any questions that people have after this short presentation on compassion resilience.
Thank you so much, Emily, for all the great information. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the question box and we can definitely get to those now.
If there's none, in our last 2 moments, one thing that I also just wanted to throw out there is another skill that I've been having a lot of conversations with people recently is around vulnerability. And I know everybody here is aware of that and sees it as an opportunity for growth, and yet it's so hard to do. This has come up a lot lately, particularly with everything going on, that we're kind of all in this unique place. We have this shared struggle And so we could be supporting each other in a whole new way and be vulnerable with each other in a whole new way. And yet there's some risk and scariness around that too. So I just encourage folks, if you haven't leaned into the opportunity to be vulnerable with those around you a little bit more, to give it a try when it feels comfortable, because it has led to a lot, it can lead to much deeper relationships and stronger connection with other folks, which is a core component to building up our compassion resilience as well.
Great, thank you. We didn't have questions, but someone said such a great job presenting, so thank you. And thank you for doing this. It gave them a lot to reflect on. So just so you get that immediate feedback that this was very helpful, so thank you.
Thank you, it's been a pleasure. And I wish you all the best of luck and stay well as we move forward with all that the fall is gonna provide us.
Great, thank you, Emily, and thank you everyone for attending. You will get your survey sent to you at the end. So thank you again, everyone, and please feel free to share, or please share your feedback. Thanks again, Emily.
Yeah, thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.